enthusiastic English speakers. They're very confident. And actually, as a newcomer to Sweden, it can be quite difficult to use Swedish with Swedes because they will respond to you in English. They're not used to hearing even the slightest kind of vowel quality difference, or you make the smallest error and there's a breakdown in communication. So it takes a long while to be able to use Swedish in Sweden as a non-native speaker. And this is especially the case on university campuses such as KTH. It's in the capital city, it's very international. About half of our graduate students are international. So there's a great deal of English spoken. And most international students that come to KTH don't learn any Swedish whatsoever, and they don't need to. So, a very common attitude is that, well, students don't need to learn Swedish for engineering, because engineers don't use Swedish for engineering, they use English. But number one, that's not true. And number two, I would say that this idea or this policy of not encouraging KTH students to use Swedish for engineering, whether you're a native speaker or you're learning it as an additional language, is damaging. And I would say that subtly, it contributes to what I would call almost a diglossia in university campuses in Sweden, whereby Swedish is used for everyday conversation, for ordering your coffee, for talking to family members. But as soon as the conversation needs to get technical or academic, then even native speakers of Swedish will move to English. Because they'll say things like, well, this technical concept doesn't have a word in Swedish. So my perspective on LSP is informed by this situation. I mean, I'm not saying that by teaching A1 Swedish to international students that we're going to fix this whole problem. But I hope what I've illustrated to you is that there is a serious problem in countries like Sweden that have really, really gone for the kind of internationalism, getting as many students as possible, and not thinking about where Swedish fits into this. Where we have, for example, bachelor students who write their degree project in English because, number one, they can't get a supervisor who speaks Swedish. And all of the material that they would write their degree project on is written in English. Nothing is written in Swedish. No research is published in Swedish. So this is why I think, this is my perspective on why I think LSP in other languages is really important. I think it sends a rather dangerous message to student engineers when we only teach them about engineering-related communication in English and not in other languages. So that's my perspective. The final thing that I'd like us to think about before we have some time to look at the material is how much LSP should we have in our language and communication courses? This is a very sensible question, and there is no consensus in terms of the answer. And that's because it depends who your students are, it depends what course they're teaching, it depends what they need. But I've put together this bar chart that really synthesizes everything I've read about how much LSP should be part of a language and communication course. In some work that I've read, it will say that A1 it should be a quarter, by C1 it should be 3/4. But the important point that I would make is that experts agree that the proportion of LSP should increase with the proficiency level. So yes, it makes perfect sense that at A1, more general language, so input in terms of teaching is needed, but then by the time we get to C2, then it's much more easy to incorporate LSP for engineers, for example, than at A1. Okay, so that's the question of how much LSP. So now to the guidebook, and I hope that when we start to look at the guidebook, you'll realise why I've gone through those questions and answers, because they really do inform the work that we've done for Intellectual Outlook 3. So the idea, I'll remind you, is that we put together a guidebook for e-communication skills. This is the structure of the guidebook. It starts with the GELS framework, explaining a little bit about how the framework works. And then there'll be one-page summaries of each level. That's what you see. You don't need to read the thing at the top. It's just to show you that on one page, that's A1, for example. And it's a list of ideas in very short form. And I've copied for you in the handout something that looks like this. For those of you with a paper form, I think it's the penultimate side. And the idea is, with these one-page summaries, is just for that teacher that is teaching B1, they want something quick, they can have a look here. Okay, it's by no means a full description of the task. And then for each level, there's one page for each skill at each level. So this is A1 spoken production. And what I've done is I've broken down the comment into two parts, and for each part there's 2 or 3 teaching ideas. Okay? At the end of IO3 of the guidebook, there are activity descriptions. So 2 years ago, I invited teachers from the GELS network to come up with ideas based on the GELS framework, and these are what are included at the end of IO3. So these are more detailed descriptions of activities. And there's an example in the handout. It's called Draw a Robot, I think. Yes. This was produced by our colleague Laurence at the University of Cambridge. What you'll notice about the activity descriptions is they're not linked to a level. And this comes back to the comment before about, what do we do if you have a student that struggles at B1 level and those that are much more advanced. I've tried to make them so that teachers teaching at various different levels can take some inspiration from this. It really depends on what you're able to pre-teach and what the students know already. Okay, so there are 30 examples of activities like this towards the end of the guidebook. So the final point I want to make about the guidebook is what the inspiration is, what is the thinking behind this guidebook, how I've put it together. And I was really inspired by the book Teaching Unplugged, which I'm confident will be familiar to some English teachers. But actually, I learnt about it just several years ago from David. I had never come across it before. But it's a very common book used in the English language teaching industry. It's written by Scott Thornbury and Luke Meddings, and it's based on what they call the dogma approach. Now, this is an approach to teaching and learning English, but it works for additional languages, I would say, without slavishly following a textbook, without slavishly following any kind of range of materials. It's about working with the students you have in the room, with their background knowledge and their interests, and then whatever you have in the room, so whether it be paper and pen, laptop, something on the board, it's quick. And I love this book. I've taken a lot of inspiration from it as a teacher, and what I like about it is the activities are described in such a way as to inspire and give basic instructions without giving you all of the detail. I find that as a teacher, if it's very detailed, if there's one thing that I don't like about it, then I don't do the task. So what I've tried to do with the guidebook is to produce just enough detail to hopefully inspire and to give basic instruction, but that's it, just basic instructions. And I hope that it works, and I'll look forward to feedback from you. Okay? So that is everything that I wanted to present. And I thought that what we could do is, with the rest of the time, is just engage with the material in a way that suits us best. So I've suggested 3 ways in which you might engage with the material. One would be to look at the framework and translate parts of it into the language that you're most comfortable with. Not within the badge project, but eventually it would be great to think that we could have this framework translated in as many different languages as possible. And I think that translating something is a way of engaging with it. You really get to think about, what does this sentence mean? If I have to translate it, then I really have to understand it. So one thing you might do in the next 20 minutes is to translate part of the framework, and feel free to email it to me. You could also think about how you might boost the LSP or e-communication context in a course that you already teach, or that you are a